almost dead inside. The bloodshed, in its primitive defiance, a pregnant star slaughtered, a man perforated with the kitchen utensils, confirmed a sense of rupture in America. The decade's subversive spirit had come on with too much fervor. Some reckoning was bound to come, or so it seemed in retrospect. The latent violence couldn't contain itself forever. The nation was immured in these events. In the motive, the manhunt, and then, in 1970, in the sensational 9.5-month-long trial. But Manson and his cohort weren't brought to justice for nearly 4 months. With the suspects unknown at large, rumors proliferated and the tension reached a fever pitch. For a while, the police maintained that the two sets of murders were unrelated. The LaBiancas were victims of a copycat attack. Even Truman Capote, whose In Cold Blood was only a few years old, fell into the speculative fervor, appearing on The Tonight Show to provide a fantasy explanation of the murders. He blamed them on one person, with the motive a fit of rage and a heaping portion of paranoia. As days turned into weeks and weeks to months, two separate teams of LAPD detectives, one assigned to Tate, the other to LaBianca, failed to share information, believing the crimes unconnected, as they lost valuable time pursuing false leads. Doubt and ridicule followed them in the press. For almost 4 months, the police would say that they had no real idea who had committed some of the most appalling murders in the history of the country. Talk about the murders long enough, and inevitably someone will bring up Joan Didion's famous remark from the White Album. The 60s ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969. The tension broke that day. The paranoia was fulfilled. There's a germ of truth in that. But the process wasn't so abrupt. It began that day, but it wasn't over, really, until December 1st, 1969. When the police announced the crimes had been solved and the nation got its first glimpse at the killers. Here was the final fulfillment of paranoia, the last gasp of the 60s idealism. At LAPD headquarters, the chief of police, Edward M. Davis, stepped up to an array of 15 microphones and announced to a stunned crowd of 200 reporters that the case was solved. Warrants were out for Charles Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Casbian. More people would be named pending grand jury indictments. Davis added, to everyone's astonishment, that the Tate and LaBianca murders were connected. The suspects may have been responsible for a series of other unsolved homicides, too. He didn't name Manson or Susan Atkins that day because they were already in custody. In mid-October, Manson, with a welter of his followers, had been apprehended on auto theft charges at the Barker Ranch, a hideaway in forbidding Death Valley. Its seclusion surpassed even that of the Spahn Ranch. Atkins had been charged with another, unrelated murder, that of Gary Heineman, an old friend of Manson. and was being held at the Sybil Brand Institute, a jail for women in Los Angeles County, where she bragged to cellmates about her complicity in the Tate murders. Those offhand remarks broke the case open for the LAPD, who began to connect the dots they had been staring at for nearly 4 months. Journalists dug into the story. Images and mugshots of Manson and the family were emblazoned on front pages and TV screens around the world. The cognitive dissonance was intense. These weren't the faces of hardened criminals or escaped lunatics. They were hippies, stereotypical flower children. In the bloom of wide-eyed youth, the men, unshaven and long-haired, wearing beads in buckskin jackets, the women in blue jeans and tie-dye tops, no bras, their hair tangled and unwashed. They talked like hippies, too, spouting an ethos of free love, eschewing monogamy and marriage in favor of sexual experimentation. They lived in roving communes, caravanning along the Golden Coast, in a Technicolor bright buses and clunkers cobbled together from spare parts. They believed that hallucinogens strengthened the spirit and expanded the mind. They gave birth naturally and raised their children together in rustic simplicity. In other ways, though, their philosophy was Gnostic, verging on the theological. Time did not exist, they proclaimed. There was no good, no bad, and no death. All human beings were God and the devil at the same time, and part of one another. In fact, everything in the universe was unified, one with itself. The family's moral code, insofar as it existed at all, was riven with contradictions. While it was wrong to kill animals, even the snakes and spiders in their bunkhouses had to be carefully spared. It was fine to kill people because a human life was inherently valueless. To kill someone was tantamount to breaking off a minute piece of some cosmic cookie. As Tex Watson later put it, if anything, death was something to be embraced because it exposed your soul to the oneness of the universe. Where had these beliefs come from? The murderers had been raised and educated in solid, conventional American communities, but no one wanted to claim them. The family, with its starry-eyed communalism, sexual frankness, and veneration of LSD, offered a screen onto which anyone could project his insecurities about the era's politics and pressures. The promise of the hippie movement had been in its willingness to forego cherished institutions in favor of the new and untested. After the Tate murders, it seemed that hippies and freaks were more than a risible sideshow. They could really undermine the status quo. Their promiscuity had always earned a lot of finger-wagging from concerned moralists, while others had looked on with thinly veiled envy. Parents were worried that their kids would drop out, become hippies, and never get decent jobs. Everywhere, kids were hitchhiking. The consensus from the straight world was that hippies were mostly harmless, but you didn't want to be one. While there had been isolated incidents of violence attributed to hippies, none of it was as horrific, premeditated, and systematic as the murders committed by the Manson family. And so much about the crimes was mirrored in uncertainty. From the motive to the body count, by some estimates, over that 4-month period in 1969, as many as 33 people may have been killed simply because one man ordered it. This was something different altogether. On December 12th, with the nation still reeling from the indictments, a piece in Time magazine drew specious parallels between hippies and violence. In the movement's invitation to freedom, the magazine warned, criminals and psychotics blossomed as easily as innocents and pacifists did. But how, Time asked, could children who had dropped out for the sake of kindness and caring, love and beauty, be enjoined to kill? Dr. Louis Leblonsky, a sociologist who had written a book called The Hippie Trip, argued that many hippies were lonely, alienated people. Even when they act as if they love, they can be totally devoid of true compassion. That is the reason why they can kill so matter-of-factly. Many hippies are socially almost dead inside. Some require massive emotions to feel anything at all. They need bizarre, intensive acts to feel alive, sexual acts, acts of violence, nudity, every kind of Dionysian thrill.